so I will not forget it, and I will start slowly. Dearest all, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us in the series that we have initiated last January. I think by now we have 10, I can say, wonderful contributors, and we are thankful to them for giving us their time. Most of them are professionals, or all of them are professionals running businesses, and time is very valuable, but here is a pro bono, let's say, contribution to our knowledge and the way that we are thinking about very important issues, challenges that organizations and societies are facing nowadays. Today I have the pleasure, and I'm thankful to him, because I know that he's a very, very busy individual running his own consulting company, which I strongly advise everybody to follow, or trying to find information by logging into the site. Later, I think we will have the opportunity to hear from our guest what the company is doing, but because I have visited the site, I find it very interesting, and it is possible that many of you may want, providing that Peter will allow it, to contact him directly in the case that you will find opportunity to connect and work, let's say, with him and his organization in a number of projects that you may think that they have a common base. So I don't want to take more of his time and the opportunity that we'll have to interact later. I will kindly advise you, if you can see the bubble, the first bubble, that it is the chat room, throughout the presentation, do not post the questions that you may have, but you can type them, and as soon as the presentation finishes in approximately 25 minutes, you can press the enter, so they can start getting uploaded at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, I'm not very experienced and will lose track. So you can type them, so you can be ready to release, let's say, your question at the end of the presentation. So I think we can start. Peter, I haven't introduced the topic, so you can take it from the beginning. We are looking forward to hearing your views and your presentation. Please go ahead whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Demetrius, and thank you for the invitation. Delighted to be here. First of all, can I ask you, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay, yes.
So delighted to be sharing some thoughts here on the topic of the uncertainty continuum. First of all, let me give you some background to myself. About 1,000 years ago, I was a member of the Irish Army, and I left about 500 years ago to set up my own business. And since then, I've traveled the world, worked around the world, the States, the Middle East, and elsewhere, broadly in the area of risk. I'm not a consultant anymore. I finished all that many years ago. Today, I'm in the decision support, automation space. My core competence, my deep background is risk and governance. And I sit on a number of different technical committees internationally, ISO, IEEE, and elsewhere, that produce these international guidelines on, let's say, risk management, governance of organizations, AI governance, and things like that. So the topic here is the uncertainty continuum. And I think in the first instance, it's important just to take the word risk, which everybody probably associates with a bad thing, and just for me to reframe it for you. Thank you, Demetrius. I'll just go to the next slide here, just whilst I'm doing my introduction. Go back. So I find the easiest way to think about a risk is, let's imagine we have £100 and we want to make sure that in 5 years' time, that £100 is at least worth £100 in 5 years' time, accounting for inflation, and preferably that it's worth more. So we've got choices. We can be really, really, really very safe and very conservative and put the £100 under the mattress. Of course, the certainty there will be that it will not be worth £100, assuming inflation, in 5 years' time. So I have a choice. I have a number of investment decisions I can make. And if I make the right investment decision, then in 5 years' time, my £100 adjusted for inflation will be worth at least £100 and hopefully worth £120, for example, £150, £200. So what I've described there is an activity where I'm making decisions. And every time I'm making a decision, I'm managing a risk. If I make one decision of putting £100 onto the mattress, clearly I won't have achieved my objective of it being worth at least 100 or 120 in 5 years' time. So another way of thinking of it is, I'm in London, I want to get to Brighton. Brighton is my objective. I want to get there in a certain number of hours. Any decision I make on the journey between London and Brighton influences the length of time it takes me to get there. If I have no regard for time, I'm on my holidays, I can choose to get there in 10 hours. But if I really must get there in, let us say, 4.5 hours, because I've got a very important meeting, I can achieve something spectacular, I can buy a house or whatever, then I have to make certain decisions. Perhaps I might get some penalty points because I might exceed the speed limit and so forth. So the point I'm getting across here is that every time you make a decision in your life and in your business, you're managing a risk, but you're managing it in the context of an objective that you're putting to the future. So I want to describe now the nature of organizations, because this conversation, given what you're doing, your global MBA program, I'm guessing that by and large, you are folk that understand organizations, see your future in organizations. Well, organizations today are no longer vertically integrated. When I was a boy, companies did everything in-house. Today, everything is outsourced. As much as possible is outsourced. Core functions, core processes, and so forth. What that means is that every company, every organization exists within an ecosystem. The company I was working with yesterday has 350,000 employees. Last year did 5 acquisitions. This year we'll do at least 3. It's creating an ecosystem. And in the context of what I've just been describing in terms of managing risks, it is very, very difficult for a company that's part of an ecosystem to understand all of the risks that can occur to it. In the 21st century, what is happening is that we will experience, if you look at the 2017 World Economic Forum report on the technology advances and their impact on the risk universe, you will see that in the 21st century alone, we're going to experience 20,000 years of technology advancement. That's a big number. That's a lot of change. So the ability to identify risks that can impact the achievement of an objective is getting harder and harder and harder. And in addition, the ability to estimate likelihood of a bad thing happening or a good thing happening is getting harder and harder and harder. So the challenge for people in the risk profession is that the classical old methods of managing risk are almost no longer fit for purpose. And this description here of an ecosystem is there to make that point. If we consider today an organization that has had to, I see the file here didn't render very well in your system. Apologies for that. I can provide a link to the deck and you get the proper formatted slide there. But every organization in the world today has had to contend with the COVID-19 impacts. That's the top bubble there, right? Every organization today has to contend with digital transformation. What is digital transformation? It essentially is a decision between 2 options. The first one is being digital first, and the second is being digitally available. What's the difference? A digital first company like a fintech has actually reimagined the entire banking experience for customers. Being digitally available simply automates old world processes. So the entire experience for the banking customer through the fintech vision has been altered. We've seen that. Similarly, when our online shopping experiences are entirely different to the analog experiences. So the challenge in digital transformation for organizations is huge because they have to reimagine and reinvent everything. There is great opportunity in that, lots of challenges in that. The environment. Clearly, we're killing the planet, and the world is responding to that. In the last 4 years, ESG, that's environment, society, and governance, ESG, investments have doubled to over $40 trillion. That's a lot of growth, a lot of money. Every single investment decision made by investment managers now has an ESG factor, whether or not it's a bespoke ESG investment. But here's the thing. Companies, in order to attract ESG investment, to qualify when they're doing their green bonds or whatever, need to disclose how green they are. But ESG is a huge area. It really is all of the non-financial activities that are taking place in an organization to achieve certain outcomes. That's a lot of change. And then consider that diagram I showed you a moment ago representing an ecosystem. What's my point? Point is that there is a new type of risk has appeared now. I call it a quantum risk. That's a metaphor for that I've taken from quantum mechanics and computer science, and it defines risks which exist in different states at the same time across systems, even though they can't be seen, they can't be observed together. Right? They exist today, but the explosion in the advent of ecosystems has caused them to appear. You are no longer an island unto yourself. So what are organizations to do about this? There's a term called dead reckoning, and it goes like this. I just have my time. It goes like this. About 300 or 400 years ago, when navigators traveled the oceans, they had no GPS. They had a ship that they knew. They had crew members who they knew. They understood the wind and the current, the stars and the sun. And they could navigate from point A to point B. And based on wind direction and the currents and the sun and the stars, they would reckon where they were. And eventually they would hit known landfall, or it could be unknown landfall. But even when they hit known landfall, sometimes it would take some time to find out exactly where they were to then get to the exact port they wanted to get to. That's my point. Risk governance today in organizations is really more like dead reckoning because of the pace of change, the complexity, the sophistication in systems. You could say in navigational terms, the seas are very rough. You can get blown off course. So the first thing to recognize is that classical risk methods are really not fit for purpose, and that risk governance, in fact, is quite weak. So there are 3 building blocks required, because it's easy to think that, for example, AIs are the answer to everything. They're a huge part of the answer, but they're not the only part to the answer. The first part of the answer is leadership, which we've kind of broken down from a blend of risk methods and practices, organizational agility, but good old leadership. The origin of the word strategy is the Hellenic Greek strategos, art of the general. Imagine a general on a hilltop all the infantry, the horsemen, and so forth. The general picks the battleground. He picks the objective beyond the battleground. He moves people around to achieve an aim, but he makes absolutely certain that everybody knows what role they're playing to achieve the objective. That's strategy. So the first thing to make sure everybody understands purpose. Now, those of you that have an interest in governance and see yourselves in the future, or maybe today you are in governance positions in organizations, you will note that there's a significant move by the regulators asking boards of directors, the governors of an organization, what is your purpose? Why are they asking that question? They're asking that question because in the digital age, consumers of services and customers of products really don't have any loyalty anymore. Today, the millennials in particular are far more concerned about the ethics of a company because today there's so much choice and people can move and switch their loyalty so quickly, so easily, if they're unhappy with the ethics or the behavior of a company. So the first thing is to have a societally centric purpose. Everybody understands it. And that means that every day we're making a decision. If they're challenged in making the decision, they say, well, this is where we're going. This is the objective, and this is my role in achieving that objective. Alignment clearly is self-explanatory. Communications in the digital age is really so important. When you're communicating with people digitally, you can have what I would say zero cognitive load. If people don't get the message in less than 5 seconds, you've lost them, and you won't get them back. And finally, transparency. When asking people in the risk world to participate in risk assessments and so forth, the first thing folk are going to ask is, what's in this for me? And typically when they complete their assessments, what they're going to do is they're going to want to know, well, I've done one assessment, what did I get out of that? They're looking for access to good quality information. They want to be able to access no longer PowerPoints or PDFs, that day is gone, that's very gone. They want to get access to a decision support, because I said earlier, every time you're making a decision, you're managing a risk. They want to get access to a dynamic decision support sandbox, and they want to be able to walk away saying, that was worthwhile. I now know something I didn't know before, and it has altered a decision I was about to make, or whatever. Digitalization involves a requirement for everything that you're communicating to be relevant, easy to do, high speed, and uber value. Technology I'm going to get into now, but before I do, just to share this with you. I'm not so sure, I'm assuming that nobody here has done much work in the risk space, but historically, at the strategic risk level, and everything I'm talking about here is set at that strategic level, that enterprise risk level. What's an enterprise risk? It's a risk which can hit the boat under the waterline, or it can fill the sails to increase speed. In times past, people did interviews, they run workshops, they would take information, put into Excel spreadsheets to extract findings, do some pretty pictures, and then present and so forth their findings. But now, with powerful AI-powered technologies, everything is done online to gather the facts, algorithms to extrapolate the findings, visualize data that allows people both to collaborate with other people, but in addition, interact with the data at the pace of change, and no longer just talking to small groups of 20 or 30, we're talking to tens of thousands. Because what are we looking for? And this is very important in terms of the ecosystem. Remember that the picture with the dots that I showed you a moment ago? What you're looking for here is the cognitive diversity. One of those diversities, a cognitive diversity, different roles, different backgrounds, different perspectives, all looking at the same issues. Because with that, you get this wisdom of the crowd, as it were. But you're looking for something else. You're looking for a cognitive leap such that you'll be able to see those quantum risks as they are traversing the organization. So essentially you crowdsource, powerful algorithms, pretty pictures in the context of the data being visualized, that you can interact with it to enhance your decision making, because as you're making decisions, you're managing your risks. I'm conscious there's a lot here to take on in a short period of time. I'm trying to give you, as it were, a high-level tour of classical risk, but where it's going in terms of decision augmentation, and in some cases, decision automation. This here is a view of a company that would have been a part of one of those dots in that earlier picture. The outer circle describes the risk universe of that company. Okay, and every company has a different risk universe. The inner circle describes those known knowns, those measurable uncertainties, those things that are insurable. And believe it or not, typically in an organization, large or small, on average, you'll only be able to insure between 10 and 20% of the total risk universe. I suspect lots of you thought it was more than that. The next band in are what we call the unmeasurable uncertainties. Those things that you can only guess, high, medium, or low, red, amber, green, and so forth. Believe it or not, it is that at the strategic level, it is that blunt an instrument. And in the center, we have these things that we say, we have a doubt, we have a worry about a scenario, but we really do not have sufficiently reliable information to estimate likelihood. But nevertheless, it's a plausible scenario. And that occupies a significant amount of, let's say, the footprint here. These circles are, can come in or come out in individual company instances, but this just gives you a profile of a typical organization. This here is a representation of a very simple way, very simple, the most basic, fundamental, classical risk method, which is for insurable risk, you measure between 0 and 1. That is the measurable uncertainties. And for the things that we can estimate high, medium, or low, and so forth, it's a scale of 1 to 5. Very simple, very crude, but it has served the world well up until very, very recently. When I say recently, perhaps the last 12, 18, 24 months. And here a visualization describing the plausibility. All that's happened here is the z-axis coming out towards me there, that describes level of knowledge. The greater the level of knowledge, the more likely I can default the classical method of estimating likelihood or whatever. So if those there are the classical methods, what does the uncertainty continuum look like? Just checking my time, on time. The y-axis here is no longer trying to estimate something which we just can't estimate. If you can't estimate likelihood, why continue to try and estimate likelihood? Estimate value. But you'll notice that the y-axis goes down below the x, because you're probably also aware, if we take with say the S&P 500, that typically most company valuations reflect about minimum 50%, if not up to 80% of company valuations relate to intangibles. Intangibles. It's no longer down to just the financial value, the fixed assets and so forth, the other assets. So what's happening now is a movement towards the chief financial officers in organizations over the next 3 to 5 years. You're going to see the emergence of a chief value officer. But the chief value officer now is going to have to parameterize and measure things that are not as easy to measure as financials. And I've given those on the left-hand side here. These relate to integrated reporting. Okay, and you should check out integrated reporting, IRC or IRC. The x-axis here relates to time. And there are multiple ways that you can look at that axis. One, for example, in the case of the environment, would be the effect of uncertainty on sustainability over time. Very hard to estimate. Now, if they're the high-level coordinates, what you'll see is that you have a bunch of activities that take place here at the value preservation level, because the entirety of this continuum is about value generation. And value generation is about the fine balancing of value creation on the one hand, but also value preservation on the other. What do we mean by that? So in terms of value preservation, we're looking at the good older labels of quality assurance, systems compliance, regulatory compliance, and so forth. In terms of operating management, we're looking at short-term issues, business issues, margin management, ESG impacts will reside at this level, continuity operations. And at the strategic level, we're looking here now at the strategic objectives. I was talking to a senior executive at Microsoft recently, and he said 6 months in Microsoft in the global cloud services space is like the Ice Age. Every 6 months, the world changes. So strategic objectives, strategy once was called long-range planning. And people thought in terms of 10 and 15 years. That's not strategy anymore. Strategy now is about agility and being nimble. So long as you're clear about your purpose, how you achieve it requires more agility, given pace of change and uncertainty and so forth. And to conclude then, we have a high-level summary and the identification here you'll see in the top of quantum risks. They're that particular thing that now needs to be understood, because if you don't understand something first, you can't get to a point where you can, I won't say control it, because I don't think you can control quantum risks, but you should be able to master quantum risks, just like a ship's captain can navigate high seas, heavy seas, seas that you or I might get lost in. A skilled ship's captain can navigate those high seas, which is what quantum risks reflect. To conclude, the last slide here, you'll have some references here to the Chief Value Officer. This document here, Accounting Can Save the Planet, written by Mervyn King of South Africa, Mervyn King of the King Report. He would be, in corporate governance terms, governs royalty globally. This here from IFAC, where all the accounting organizations have come together and coalesced and produced multiple thought pieces. If you read those thought pieces, you see the future. And here you see reference to the Chief Value Officer. You've got access there to my Medium profiles. There are some papers there on the quantum risks and agile risk and so forth. So 30 minutes are up. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. Very, very interesting presentation and very rich slides. Some of them, I think, somebody should study for some time in order, let's say, to conclude of what is going on. Very rich in content. Thank you very, very much. I can see that we have a couple of questions. One is coming from Felicita. It's saying that you have shown us risk management evolution. What do you think are the main issues that you have found in the application of this, of your approach, or whatever is your approach when you deal with projects? Is there any issues that you encounter, let's say, that you can share with us in organizations when you do some projects related to risk management? I don't know if you see the questions yourself.
No,
yeah,
I understand the question. So my perspective, you know, my bias, my expertise is at the strategic risk level, and a number of reports have been done over the last 10, 15 years with regards to a thing called enterprise risk management. Okay, an enterprise risk is a risk that, you know, companies, you're unlikely to blow a company up to destroy its value from the aggregation of slips, trips, and falls, for example. But there are certain types of things that can happen that can blow the company up. And a number of reports have concluded that, number one, most of the things that kill companies are the decisions made in the boardroom. Okay? Strategic missteps, or they are the big operational risks and an operational risk relates to people, process, and systems that have a significant strategic impact. And we've also seen that there hasn't yet been a survey, a global survey of enterprise risk management that says that ERM is working well everywhere. By and large, it is suboptimal at best, and most companies would say that it is failing to deliver value, because most of the effort is, in risk management terms, is at the value preservation space of the continuum. It's not really at the, it doesn't get to the balance between creation and preservation. So by and large, to answer that lady's, I think it's a lady, question, the biggest single root cause issue is good management of risk is mandated by the governors of an organization, but it's not practiced by them, and it's not understood. And a part of that problem is people like myself, the risk technocrats who use jargon and don't talk in business terms, are not talking in a way that is accessible. So we need to do an awful lot better in our communications and explaining how everything works. And I'm part of a group of people globally that's trying to address that and address the problem with regards to the challenges of the classical risk methods. I hope I've answered the question in some way reasonably decently.
Yeah. Another one is coming from Damien. It's a kind of personal one, but very interesting. Like how your defense force background has helped you move into management and governance. Maybe you want to address this. It's very interesting because all of the attendees are coming from a variety of backgrounds. Military one has peculiarities.
Sure. So when I was 17 and I joined the Irish Military College to become an officer, I was a cadet. And after receiving my very basic training, I was given a weapon. And I was trained how to use that weapon, and I was being trained for leadership. Our focus was always on the objective. And we were being trained to put ourselves in harm's way to achieve an objective. But you know something? The word risk was never used. It was just inherent in everything we did. We took so many precautions. And everything in the military, in every military, all over the world, the only way that you can put yourselves in harm's way to achieve an aim and hope to have more people who are alive than dead is by taking extreme precautions. And those precautions are essentially, risk treatment and so forth. So what came into my sinews, my DNA, was the understanding of understand your objective and always be able to weigh off what I might lose towards achieving it, the reserves I have to hold back to achieve it, but what I have to do to achieve my aim ultimately. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Peter. Another one is coming from Camille, a very, very interesting one and very related to what we are discussing. Is saying that given the change of pace and need for tactical agility that you use as an important trait nowadays, agility, how do leaders stay focused on strategy? In other words, it means something long term, avoiding suboptimal pivoting. This is very focused question, very good question.
Could you repeat the question again, please?
Yeah. The question is, given the change of pace and need for tactical agility, how do leaders stay focused on strategy?
Okay, I understand.
Tactical, by definition, it's something that's short term. And you mentioned this, the long range now, it doesn't exist. I mean, you cannot really plan for 10, 15, 20 years as we used to in the 70s or 80s.
Yes. Yeah, okay, sorry, I understand the question. That's very straightforward. So, in the first instance, strategy starts with, why are we here? What we want to achieve, because your performance and your success towards the achievement of an objective, that's the thing by which you're going to be measured. Now, to achieve that particular objective in this day and age, it is certain you're going to have lots of obstacles, and you're also going to have lots of opportunities. But in organizations in the 70s, Demetrius, when you and I were boys, you had the beginning, the middle, and the bottom of an organization. Today, organizations are getting flatter. There are fewer people in the middle, because most of the people in the middle really just are they manage processes. And it is found that they quite often can slow down decision making. So what you do is, and the way it is done in terms of organizational agility and answering the question, it's about making sure everybody understands what their role is, about alignment. Remember, PACT, purpose, alignment, communications, and transparency. And what their role is towards the achievement of an objective. And you devolve as much decision-making responsibility to them as you can. So people who are closest to operations on the ground make decisions that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, somebody more high up would have made. People who are closest to the customer will make the most critical decisions. There are approaches now to decision making, and in particular in terms of agility, concept called fail fast. If something isn't working out, put your hand up, say it's not working out, and stop and take another route. Like in the military, you thought it was okay to go down this route. Well, you find out 5 minutes later it's not. Well, fair enough. Stop doing what you're doing. You got to come back and go a different way. So strategy today is more about strategic agility and about the organization being able to weave and bob and move in harmony with the whole and keeping this rhythm towards the achievement of a purpose. And if you're not performing within a time frame, so long as you explain and people understand, because transparency today is something which is valued by investors, by consumers, by society at large, and so forth. I hope I've answered the question.
Yeah, in addition, I will add up that, of course, we have in mind not family businesses or not-for-profit, or usually when we discuss these things, we have in mind public organizations in the sense that they are listed organizations. And the issue of, let's say, activists and their involvement in decision-making and how they influence board decision-making, short-termism, if you wish, transparency and accountability that must exist in this kind of organizations reinforce the issues of strategic maneuvering, let's say, or the agility issue, especially in this kind of organizations. Yeah, please.
Right, just two observations to what you said. I would not differentiate between non-commercial organizations, NGOs, and for-profit publicly quoted companies. Because if we take a not-for-profit, well, it's generating value. Its value generation objective is kind of directed towards society, let us say. And its stakeholders can include, a different bunch of constituents within society. And you'll have lots of different NGOs and not-for-profits doing different things for a societal gain. Now you'll find that publicly quoted companies, the really successful ones, and those, the likes of the top 10 ICT companies globally, the Googles and so forth, you'll find them, communicating in a way that where they're trying to, it's hard for companies to do this, that they're trying to be seen to be empathetic. Because what we're also realizing from after the global financial crisis was that if you misbehave and you destroy society, as what happened back then with the GFC, what happens? Your social contract is withdrawn. or your social contract is clipped because regulation increases to ensure, and that's the way society protects itself. So I would say the measures required, and by the way, the directors in NGOs and not-for-profits, quite often the directors of these companies are directors of publicly quoted companies, and they will bring in that way of thinking and that approach to good practice. So personally for myself, I see no difference. Everyone is generating value, some for finance and different types of stakeholders, others for society, but it's all value.
Yeah, I take the point. Thank you. For some reason, I think something is frozen. No, it's working again. Okay, it's working again. I try to find other questions. Do you see the questions yourself, Peter?
No, I don't. I can just see my panel here with the
okay.
various.
Sabine is asking that, saying that earlier in your presentation you shared that startups are changing the financial service industry. To what extent you believe that policymakers and regulators will be aligned with the new normal of digital business environment? So the question is related to what extent policymakers and regulators will be embracing, let's say, the digital world.
Okay,
I think
that's a good question
already. Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah, I think they do. They embrace. They don't have an option. The technology is running.
Yeah, correct. But what you'll find is that the regulators are beginning to become quite proactive. You know, I'm aware of, you know, certain regulators that would have outreach. They would have laboratories where, you know, the founders of a fintech, for example, can reach out to them and say, look, we have a particular idea here. We'd like to understand how this resonates with you, the regulators, and your view of how it would resonate with the market. And my personal experience is that if you look at the FRC, the FCA, they're very, very open to helping fintechs and founders of companies, giving their view. And I'm aware, for example, of one instance of a panel of 30-odd people being a panel that fintechs can reach into in a structured way, and they're very careful to ensure that they don't cross the line because they are regulators after all. But they are becoming progressively proactive and they're listening. Now they're slower always to act than industry will act. They almost need to be slower for a variety of reasons, given their policy roles, or rather that their public policy kind of roles, we'll say, yeah. But they are wide awake to what's happening and they know what good looks like. But they do tend to lag, but they do know what good looks like.
Yeah, thank you. Another question I think is related to what we were saying earlier, listed versus not listed or small family offices. Emmanuel is asking this. We know it says that small companies by definition, they have limited resources, except if they are belonging to ecosystem. It's a word that you are using in your consulting firm. And the question is how small businesses, they can manage risk evaluation or risk prevention or whatever. I mean, what small businesses can do, since it is backbone of every country. I think most of the times that 90% of the activity is coming from small businesses.
In some respects, small businesses have an easier challenge. You know, that the bar is not as high, because the founder of a small business, he's living the purpose of the business every moment of every day. Every decision he makes is bringing him on the journey towards that purpose. Now, more and more founders, being younger people and millennials, are kind of digital natives, and they can provide global services, really powerful, by the way, global services digitally, because they can procure systems at commercial rates that make sense. And what they're doing effectively there is they're actually onboarding the benefit of the governance and risk management rigors that those bigger companies have to employ because they're bigger, in the development of their products or services, be they SaaS or whatever. So small companies, you know, insofar as they control what's within their envelope, right, within their circle, they live the purpose every day. Every decision is weighted towards the achievement of an objective. And because look, at risk management is just organized common sense. That's all it is. It's not calculus. And the smaller you are, if you are digital and you're using, you know, you're procuring services, you actually are stronger today than a startup 20, 30 years ago, because you are buying in services that are inherently robust, because you're buying them from larger organizations. And so you're getting strength, as it were, from those larger organizations.
Yeah, yeah. The more you talk, the more I was thinking that maybe there is a direct and strong, let's say, either statistical or any other relationship between the size, let's say, of the firm, irrespectively what I mean by size, if it is number of employees, turnover, or regions that the company operates. So the smaller the organization entity, the lower proportionally the risk and the consequences of this. So yes, a big organization, let's say multinationals, by definition, they are facing multidimensional and very deep or quantum in that sense risks than smaller organizations. But by definition, they have more capabilities to deal with them, either resources or access to resources versus more. So there is an analogy here. Another question is coming from our friend Yanis, is concerned with the enterprise risk management. And I think his question is, if you think, based on your exposure in this kind of consulting and in the world, if enterprise risk management will embrace by organization is something that more and more will be evident in organizations as a way of thinking, I assume, or way of acting.
So the question is, to make sure I understand, will enterprise risk management be?
Yes. This is the question, yes. Any thoughts on whether more organizations will succeed in satisfying the requirements that ERM, let's say, poses?
Yeah. I think that the risk industry needs to do a lot better to help industry, general industry, understand what risks are. And in fact, I'm involved with some people internationally, and it's quite possible, if we're successful, that is, that in maybe 5 years' time or thereabouts, you'll see the dial moving from not so much risk management or enterprise risk management, but uncertainty management. And when we begin to use, you know, it's all about holding conversations that are jargon free, right? And until the risk folk can hold jargon free discussions with the business folk, I think ERM will remain kind of fairly not as relevant as it should be. I think there's a significant challenge there for that concept. It's not working very well. And as Einstein, I think it was, who said that one definition of madness is keep on repeating things that don't work and expecting change. So it's time to change. So I don't know. Ask me in 5 years' time if I'm alive, God willing. I'm not so sure. I think maybe the same approach, but the same fundamentals, but a different approach, perhaps, because ERM is not achieving its aim just yet.
Yeah, just to clarify, when you were saying about risk industry, more or less you have in mind the risk professionals or the risk profession or the risk, let's say, literature or something like this, because there is no an industry as such in I mean, it's a market of.
Yeah, that's a good observation. You're right about that. I'm guessing, really, I think that what you're finding is that no organization can become seriously big without it mastering data and without it understanding how it can generate value from data. Now, the significance of what I've just said there is that there are significant controls, algorithmic controls that can be designed in, because those organizations are equally organizations that can automate decisions at the tactical levels, right? So decisions that would have been made by humans more often than not going forward will be made by AIs, programs. The decisions where you're going to have the human in the loop are those that are where the levels of complexity are such, or the number of variables are such, that we're unable to design and develop a model, because there are certain risk root causes that you cannot really credibly estimate the future values, and they're to do with humans, economics, society, and politics. And politics, I mean small p as well, not just national politics. So those four things precipitate variables that are very, very hard to parameterize. So at the strategic levels, you'll have more humans in the loop. At the tactical levels, you'll have more machines making decisions. And that's risk. And of course, every time you make a decision, you're managing a risk.
Yeah, clear. Another question is related to something that was coming to my mind when I'm thinking about risk or external environment or even internal environment and what can happen in the future, is the scenario planning that we were exposed in the 70s again. I mean, I assume scenario planning was a structured way developed by the Shell or other organizations. Yes. The crisis of the oil crisis in the 70s, just, let's say, to mitigate, to foresee, to take into account, I don't know what is the best expression, uncertainties, or in quite other words, the risks that we are talking about. Is the risk profession, let's say, embraces scenario planning, or now they have moved to other kind of outputs, let's say, or services?
Yeah, scenario planning was introduced at a seriously structured and professional level by Shell, and Shell has benefited massively from that. And I'm involved with folk at the moment where we're writing a guidance on emerging risks. It took us a year to define what the term emerging risk stood for, because it has to translate into all languages across the world and so forth. Not what it stood for, what it meant. What was the definition? That's my point. So when you consider pace of, technology disruption, pace of global change, lengthening supply chains, weather, runaway weather, the environment, it's becoming harder and harder and harder to depict what might happen, and emerging risks are growing. Consequently, scenario planning as a well understood tool now is becoming more popular and more people expert in it. The challenge with scenario planning is that you put the scenarios there. Ultimately, you have to allocate resources if you're going to do anything about them.
Yeah.
So
correct.
if you don't have the level of knowledge to depict which particular scenario is likely to be one that you should put resources against, what you end up having to do is to be agile in your decisions, saying, right, okay, in the 70s, we would have made big bet decisions, a waterfall of 100 million to do X, right? And it will, without doubt, produce a result of Y in 12 months' time. So now that's not happening. Maybe it's a bigger amount of money, but people are saying, we're making kind of a series of promises iteratively. So the first promise they're making with regards to the drawdown of money or whatever, or allocation of resources or a new product launch, will be in the context of, we expect at the end of quarter to be able to report on ABC. And by the way, Demetrius, to conclude on this, we are going through a rite of passage between short-termism and long-termism.
Yeah.
You made that reference earlier on. As long
Yeah.
as CEOs are compensated based on their quarterly numbers, and there's stuff being done to address that, but it's still we're still not out of that era.
Yeah, I
It'll
know.
take another 5 years at least before we're out of that era.
Peter, I have to thank you very, very much for your presentation and the comments that you provided to the questions. They are both very interesting. We had a wonderful panel as well. I'm sure that there are at least a couple that I have spotted that most probably they will contact you, since there are consultants and they may find your organization that you have created very interesting, so they may contact you seeking, let's say, cooperation at some form or another. I thank everybody for the time that you have sacrificed to join us. Again, Peter, thank you very, very much. We will be in touch to send you over whatever I have to, the recording, and we will be in touch. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for coming over. Thank you, guys.
Stay safe.
All the best.
Stay safe, everybody. Very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.